Hello, and a warm welcome to this instalment of Art Unlocked. I'm Robert Wenley, the Head of Collections and Deputy Director at the Barber Institute of Fine Arts at the University of Birmingham. I'd like to take you on a personal tour of some of the highlights of our outstanding paintings collection through the perspective of recent research and collaborative projects, something which, as a university-based gallery, we are of course always very keen to develop and promote. This, by the way, is a view of our 17th century gallery, which happens to be my favourite of all our 4 galleries, though naturally I love them all. First, a bit of context. The Barber Institute sits in a superb Art Deco building designed in the mid-1930s by Robert Atkinson, an architect best known for his stylish cinemas, apartment blocks, and the interiors of the Daily Express building on Fleet Street. It was formally opened by Queen Mary in 1939, closing within days because of the outbreak of World War II. One of the bright spots for us of the horrible past 18 months was the announcement last August that the building has been elevated to Grade 1 status, a formal recognition of what we had known all along, that this is a masterpiece in its own right. This is partly a matter of the exquisite exterior, but also of the superb first floor gallery spaces and outstanding ground floor concert hall contained within. Interestingly, it had always been expected that the building would need to grow as the collections expanded, so the grand entrance that you see here is placed at one end of the main facade, with space for a balancing wing to its right. The Barber Institute was founded in 1932 for the study and encouragement of art and music by the remarkable Hattie Lady Barber, shown here in this rather extraordinary life-size portrait by Nesta Cambier. The widow of the Birmingham property developer Sir Henry Barber, Hattie used the family fortune, in the absence of any children, to found in his name the Institute and also the Henry Barber Trust. The Trust owns the collections at the Barber, as well as, to this day, underpinning much of the running costs of the Institute, and in normal years, its concert programme. All of us who work here feel tremendously grateful for its existence, especially over the past year. Lady Barber is shown here with her beloved Yorkshire Terriers by the Thames at Culham Court, near Henley, the Barber's home from the 1890s, where she could indulge her many passions, including gardening, horse riding, needlework, drawing, and dressing up. As well as some fine tapestries and textiles, she collected antique and modern lace, sometimes incorporating pieces into her clothing, as here. These collections are now part of the Barber, along with some of the furniture from Culham, and a somewhat excessive number of other Cambier portraits of her, all of which can be found on Art UK, should you be interested. Cambier, a Belgian artist, in effect became Lady Barber's court artist for a number of years around 1920, when he actually lived at Culham, teaching her skills and painting numerous portraits of her, while she promoted his work among her friends and contacts. However, the Institute's internationally recognised fine art collection, which now numbers over 150 paintings in the Western European tradition and about 1,000 prints, drawings, sculptures and other works of art, plus some 16,000 principally Roman and Byzantine coins, was all acquired for the Trust and thence the Institute on the art market after Lady Barber's death in 1933, through the advice of successive directors. These have all been distinguished art historians, and the collection therefore has a hand-picked character, especially well balanced across schools and periods. And so to the collection itself, which I'll approach in chronological order. I'd like to start, aptly enough, with this magical depiction of a birth, the Nativity of Christ, nearly 1.5 meters in each direction. Painted by the Antwerp master Jan de Beer in the late 1510s, it's a well-represented subject in European art, but an unusual take on it, being one of the first and finest to set the scene at night. This allows the artist to play with a variety of light sources, the moon in the night sky, upper right, a distant fire below that, Joseph's lamp on the left. But the brightest of all is the light mysteriously emanating from the Christ child in the manger. From this, the surrounding angels react in both wonder and horror, foreseeing Christ's ultimate fate. This very contrived use of light, the rich textiles and improbably fluttering draperies, are all characteristics of Antwerp mannerism, a stylistic movement of which De Beer was one of the greatest exponents. As such, our painting was the subject of one of our annual research-led in-focus loan exhibitions in 2019, in partnership with the leading De Beer specialists Dan Ewing and Peter van den Brink. The exhibition gathered together for the first time all De Beer's paintings and drawings in public and private collections in the UK. In fact, the Barber could be said to possess not one, but two of these, since the Nativity is only one part of a double-sided panel. The other side can be seen in the centre of this view of our Renaissance gallery, which contains all our paintings made before 1600. Representing Joseph and the suitors, the side shown here is another moment in the life of the Virgin Mary that would have been told and celebrated across the other scenes of the vast altarpiece, of which this panel formed merely the lower part of one wing. Trying to recreate the context of this undocumented panel, one of De Beer's greatest surviving works, was a principal aim of the exhibition. How to display a large double-sided work in the permanent hang is something of a challenge, but one that we met a few years ago by commissioning this dedicated plinth and frame for it. Today, as seen here, it has pride of place in a gallery that also contains paintings by Simone Martini, Sandro Botticelli, Giovanni Bellini, and Paolo Veronese, to mention only the best-known names. Our galleries are arranged chronologically to show the development of Western European art from its medieval origins, in a collection that Lady Barber stipulated should be, quote, of that standard of quality required by the National Gallery and the Wallace Collection, unquote. It never fails to surprise first-time visitors how consistently that has been achieved in what is one of the finest collections of its size in Europe. That it should be found on a leafy Midlands University campus only adds to that sense of amazement. On the other hand, Lady Barber also restricted the fine art collection to works made before 1900, which we can only assume reflected an aversion to contemporary art. And although that was later amended, even today, the Trust limits its purchases to works that are at least 30 years old. Moving through now to the 17th century gallery, we find an even greater concentration of great names and fine paintings, including works by Frans Hals, Peter Paul Rubens, Anthony van Dyck, Nicolas Poussin, and Claude Monet. Probably my favourite is this operatic rendition of a scene from the biblical story of Esther, the Jewish bride of the Persian king Ahasuerus. It's a complex tale, but the artist, Jan Steen, was a great master of storytelling, and he really nails the pivotal moment in the narrative to superb effect. We see the furious king, eyeballs popping, denouncing the cringing Haman, his first minister, who had earlier manipulated Ahasuerus to decree that all the Jews in Persia should be exterminated. This he had done to defeat his great rival Mordecai, seen back left, himself Jewish, who had adopted the orphan Esther and brought her into his faith. She in turn had only just married Ahasuerus at this point in the story to become queen, but knowing of Haman's plans, had arranged a banquet so that she could there reveal her true faith and call out the minister. Steen brilliantly encapsulates this key moment through the contrasting gestures of the three main protagonists. Their emotions are unmistakable. If it seems theatrical, with its mix of contemporary and vaguely antique costumes, this is no coincidence. Steen was consciously evoking contemporary Amsterdam theatre productions to help convey the story, one that was seen to have parallels with the fledgling Dutch Republic's struggles against Spain. There is even a proscenium curtain over the main protagonists' heads to underline that this is a piece of theatre, not a documentary. What is distinctly Steen's is the sumptuous representation of materials, the sheen of Esther's silk dress, the soft pile of the table carpet, the gleam of the metalwork, including the falling spoon and richly embossed silver salver that once supported the peacock pie, its earthbound fate, symbolic of Haman's crashing pride. This painting, probably Stain's greatest biblical work, also became the centerpiece of an In Focus exhibition back in 2017. This photo is a heady reminder of what a busy and popular show used to look like before the pandemic and lockdowns. We were fortunate to obtain loans from the USA as well as Europe and the UK in what was the first ever exploration of Stain's Old Testament subjects. It was again a product of deep research and fruitful collaboration, this time with two emerging curators, Rosalie van Gulik and Nina Cahill. The exhibition explored the powerful echoes through history of the persecution of the Jews in Stain's time and in the 20th century, since our painting was purchased in 1939 from a Jewish dealer, Walter Bachstitz, who later had to yield another Old Testament painting by Jan Steen to Hitler's deputy, Reichsmarshal Hermann Goering, as the price of his freedom. Recent research by two young colleagues has also shed new light on challenging issues brought up by aspects of this majestic painting, The Marriage Feast at Cana, by the great Sevillian artist Bartolomé Esteban Murillo. Measuring some 235 centimeters wide, it is one of the artist's largest and finest works in the UK, and without question one of the Barber's most important paintings. It was commissioned by Nicolas Omazur, a wealthy Flemish merchant in Seville, who became Murillo's #1 patron. A reference to his trade in Chinese silks is provided by the richly ornamented cloth on the table in the left foreground. The painting may have been ordered to commemorate his marriage in 1672 to Isabel del Malcampo, and some scholars have even seen their own features in those of the bride and groom here in this painting. Taken from the New Testament, this was the occasion of Christ's first miracle, the turning of water into wine, and we see him here gesturing to this effect on the left, his mother Mary behind him. The subject has provided Murillo with a wonderful opportunity to show off his skills at depicting materials, expressions, and a multitude of figures interacting dynamically, as with the stain. In both, a history painting is combined with an exquisite still life. The characteristically Sevillian stoneware vessels in the foreground are especially effectively rendered, their tactile, tangible surfaces glistening with water. It is here that we find a particularly intriguing element in the composition, the black boy, who stands out for his skin colour, rich red and gold livery, and sensitive and lifelike depiction. My colleague Helen Cobby and former colleague Becca Randall, in part responding to queries from our visitors concerning this much overlooked figure, have recently explored his possible identity and function. Through their own research and through collegiate discussions with specialists, they have concluded that the boy was probably modelled on a real enslaved youth, perhaps in the patron's or artist's household. Moreover, that rather than just denoting the wealth of the groom, and by extension Omazur, the patron, the boy, through his proximity to the water vessels, may well allude to the forced conversion to Christianity through baptism of enslaved Africans and Afro-Hispanics in 17th century Seville, and the promise of Christ's redemption for any and every sinner. The image builds a picture of Christian harmony, when the reality for Africans and Afro-Hispanics would have been largely the opposite, one of violent restriction of selfhood, denouncement of their own religion, and erasure of identity. Perhaps for this reason, despite their large numbers in the wider population, black figures appear in very few other Spanish paintings from this period. This makes the Barber's Murillo an even more precious and intriguing historical document. Wealth is very definitely celebrated in my next selection, a portrait of two children of Sir Sampson Gideon MP, himself the son of a very rich banker of Portuguese Jewish ancestry. In 1787, we know that Gideon paid the great Sir Joshua Reynolds, the artist of this work, the fee of £300 for this life-size painting, a huge sum worthy of a great old master at the time. 226 years later, in 2013, it actually cost the Barber nothing, when the trust was fortunate to be allocated this painting by the acceptance in lieu scheme, whereby estates that owe tax to the Treasury can offset this by offering artworks or chattels to equivalent value to the nation. It is in fact one of 4 paintings in the Barber's collection to have been acquired in this way. The first of these, a Renoir, allocated in 1984, was also the first acquisition by the Trust that was not purchased entirely from its own funds. The other 2 are much more recent acquisitions. An extraordinary 1980s landscape by Frank Auerbach from Lucien Freud's estate, our most recent work by date, and the only one by a living artist, came in 2015. And then finally, a portrait by the progressive German artist Lovis Corinth was allocated to us jointly with the National Gallery earlier this year, our most recent acquisition. This portrait, the Reynolds, marks a high watermark in his late manner, grand, imposing and stylish. Both sitters wear the very latest fashions, Murillo in white and black, offset by that dash of blue in the watered silk sash, William in a cutaway coat, double-breasted waistcoat, buff breeches and jockey boots. Murillo both wears her hat, crowned with ostrich plumes, and holds in her lap her brother's, the artist thereby creating a strong triangular form between heads and hat that provides a powerful structure for the composition. It's an undoubted masterpiece by one of England's greatest portraitists, and also the Barber's first and to date only full-length and double portrait. It was, however, somewhat compromised by a harsh scrubbing about 50 years ago, which left the foliage much denuded and, more seriously, William with vivid patches of green in his hair. He became a punk, having lost the upper glazes. These have, thankfully, been successfully restored. The Gideon's portrait was the centrepiece of our contribution to the Royal Academy's 250th anniversary in 2018, in which we featured not just our 4 paintings by Reynolds, the Royal Academy's first president, of course, but also a number of works from his own remarkable art collection, the largest formed in England in the 18th century. One of his most prized works was this head of a young woman, which he believed to be a study by the great Flemish artist Peter Paul Rubens, whom he hugely admired, of his young second wife, Hélène Thormont. The back of the panel still bears an inscription in Reynolds's hand to this effect, and we know he proudly and prominently displayed the painting in his house. However, it is now considered that both the title and attribution are wrong. The head was copied from the figure of a kitchen maid, which was by Rubens, but it was most likely made by a member of Rubens's studio after the master's death. Technical analysis and research has revealed that it was intrusively tinkered with at a later date, quite possibly by Reynolds himself, who we know sometimes would go so far as to use abrasives, blades or chemicals to strip back the paint layers of paintings by sometimes quite major artists in his collection in a bid to discover their secrets. He would equally, on occasion, repaint works in his collection in order to improve them, as he saw it. A painting quite close in date to the Reynolds has some of its secrets revealed by recent research, thanks in no small part to Art UK's wonderful art detective resource. Acquired in 1940 as a portrait by the great Spanish artist Francisco de Goya of his mother, this attribution had long been dismissed, along with the authenticity of 2 accompanying letters, also supposedly by Goya, that purportedly mention the paintings. A research project initiated by Fatima Vicente Cordero, a postgraduate student placement from the University of Navarra in Pamplona, Spain, led to the proposal last year by a number of specialists consulted via an art detective thread that the artist is in fact Jose Campeche y Jordan. Working exclusively on the Caribbean island of Puerto Rico, Campeche's father was a black man freed from enslavement, while his mother was a white woman from the Canary Islands. Campeche is now acclaimed as the finest painter active in Central or South America in the 18th century. The identity of the somewhat stern-looking sitter remains unknown, but her brooch represents the Virgin of Solitude. She may have been a member of a specific lay religious society, in Puerto Rico. More research working with colleagues in Puerto Rico needs to be done and is underway, but this discovery is as exciting as it is unexpected. The announcement of the new attribution in a Barber press release earlier this year was picked up by the Times and thereafter flashed around the world, becoming a leading story even on Puerto Rican TV, and one of both the Barber's and Art UK's most retweeted news items of the year to date. The painting has been put on permanent display for the first time in decades, alongside paintings by Canaletto, Guardi, Gainsborough and Vigée Lebrun, as well as the Reynolds. An object once of some embarrassment and even shame is now celebrated as an exceptionally rare example of this artist's work outside his native Ireland and the United States of America. Moving into the later 19th century, I'd like to conclude with Manet's fascinating portrait of his fellow artist Carolus Duran. This was begun in the summer of 1876, while both were staying at a patron's country estate near Paris. The two artists were old friends and they agreed to paint each other. But Manet wrote that there was, quote, too much entertainment here to work seriously, unquote. They had to get back to Paris and the portrait was never finished. But this is, of course, of particular fascination and value to students in a teaching collection like the Barber's. You, like some of them, may have spotted the playful allusion in Carolus Duran's pose to famous paintings of monarchs by Van Dyck and Velázquez in the Louvre, and echoes of the celebrated classical sculpture, the Apollo Belvedere, echoes that are also found in Reynolds' William Gideon, shown earlier, and even Cambier's Lady Barber that we saw at the start of this talk. Manet's portrait was lent to the National Gallery in 2013 in a small show to mark the 80th anniversary of the founding of the Barber Institute. The exhibition consisted of the first dozen purchases made for the Barber before it had even opened, in which period many of them were displayed at the National Gallery, or, for then modern works like this Manet, at the Tate Gallery. This painting was in fact the first Manet to be acquired for a museum outside London, and at nearly 2 meters tall is one of the largest works in a public collection. For facts like these, the Art UK website was a really invaluable research tool. The Manet is just one of the Barber's especially fine collection of 19th century French paintings of our unusually well-balanced collection. Besides the Manet, there are paintings by Ingres, Delacroix, Corot, Courbet, Puvis, Degas, Renoir, Monet, Van Gogh, Gauguin and Vuillard, amongst others. Thanks to Lady Barber's restrictive founding stipulation, the 20th century is rather less well represented, but can still boast works by Bonnard, Derain, Gwen-John, George Bellows, Leger and Magritte, alongside the Auerbach and Corinth. And the collection is still growing. Sadly, there's not been time or space to feature our sculpture, including important works by Roubiliac, Nost, Gott, Degas, Rodin and Gabot, or our equally fine but small collection of works on paper, among them fine drawings by Dürer, Rembrandt, Cortona, Ingres, Turner and Beardsley, and also this Agostino Carracci behind me. But these all can be found on the Art UK website and of course enjoyed on visits to the Barber. I'd like to thank Art UK, in particular Flora Doble and Bloomberg Philanthropies for this opportunity to share some of these highlights of the Barber with you. Thank you for all your questions, and I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. And on that note, I shall leave you. Goodbye. Have a nice evening.